Hello, and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report. I'm your host, Steve Lance, and here's a look at some of the stories we've been covering for you today. On International Human Rights Day, a U.S. senator expressed concerns over the ongoing persecution of Falun Gong practitioners in China. And just how effective will a diplomatic boycott on improving China's human rights be on the communist regime? Congress is moving up to tighten up on the executive branch. The House passed a bill to limit presidential power, but the lead sponsor of the bill, Representative Adam Schiff, tells us he doesn't think the vaccine mandate would be an example of presidential overreach. President Joe Biden hosted the first White House Summit for Democracy on Thursday. The OMICRON variant was the main topic of concern throughout the event.
Maybe the most urgent challenge facing our planet right now is ending the COVID-19 pandemic.
Secretary Blinken called for unified democratic action against the coronavirus. So far, Omicron has spread to over 60 countries around the world, including the United States. It is still unknown how dangerous the new variant will be, but early signs point to mild symptoms.
19 states right now, about 3/4 of them are vaccinated, and the disease is mild. The disease is mild.
The Biden administration has decided not to close the economy, but to deal with it using vaccines, boosters, and testing. Australian Deputy Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce has confirmed he's tested positive for the CCP virus while traveling in Washington, D.C. Joyce, who is fully vaccinated, said Wednesday that he got tested after experiencing mild symptoms and that he will remain in quarantine. His positive test follows a stop in London to discuss social media regulations. Joyce said the remaining members of his traveling delegation have tested negative. It wasn't immediately clear what variant the Australian Deputy Prime Minister had contracted. And Kentucky Republican Congressman Brett Guthrie announced late Wednesday that he has tested positive for the CCP virus. He said he's fully vaccinated and only has mild symptoms. In recent months, at least 19 lawmakers have tested positive for the CCP virus, including 15 in the House and 4 in the Senate, and all of them have been vaccinated. And with Beijing's Winter Olympics just around the corner, we spoke with Congressman Louis Gohmert to find out his perspective on just how effective a diplomatic boycott will be on changing China's dismal human rights record and what this could mean for the athletes, and his new bill that proposes to calculate just how much money China is stealing from Americans through intellectual property theft. Washington correspondent Kay Rubacek has the story.
Congressman, after President Biden announced the diplomatic boycott of the Winter Olympics in Beijing, Australia, the UK, Canada are now starting to follow suit. Do you think this is actually going to make a difference in China's human rights records and our relationship?
No, I don't think it will make any difference in China's human relations, their discrimination, or the abuses of different peoples. And we had a president named Jimmy Carter, who was one of the least effective presidents we've ever had on foreign affairs. And he did a lot like Joe Biden, where he thinks he can just be nice and convince people that have a little bit of evil in them to do the right thing. It doesn't work that way. Jimmy Carter just declared, basically out of frustration, he was ineffective in foreign diplomacy and holding people's feet to the fire. Okay, we're not going to let our American Olympians who've been training for 4 years, preparing for this moment in their lives, we're not going to let them go to the Moscow Olympics. Well, Russia wasn't really hurt. They went on. They may have lost some money. But the people that were really hurt were the athletes. The American athletes paid the price of having a weak, ineffective president. That shouldn't be the people that pay the price. The people that pay the price should be the Russians. That's who should have paid the price. And let's face it, everything in foreign diplomacy, foreign relations, even foreign business relations, It's all about leverage. And when you give away your leverage for nothing, then you're not going to have anything to negotiate with.
You mentioned about the athletes themselves. The World Tennis Association, the WTA, they've taken a stance against China disappearing one of their athletes, tennis athletes, Peng Shuai, and Enes Kanter, NBA star, has been seen putting out images of organ harvesting happening in China on his shoes, his NBA shoes, and that's making a very big statement. But if these people are on their own, how effective do you think these types of statements can be in helping keep our athletes safe and also making an impact in China and our relations?
They can and they do make an impact. When Apple cuts a deal or the NBA cuts a deal with the Chinese Communist Party, because that's who's running things, they are not effective in helping people there. In order to be effective, they would have to demand better treatment for whomever they chose, whether it's the Uyghurs, the Christians, Falun Gong, whomever. You have to take that stand before you cut your billion-dollar deals. And so thank God that we have people willing to stand up like that. But unfortunately, it's not the State Department and it's not this president.
Now, speaking of helping the Chinese make money, let's talk about your bill. Yeah. This is related to intellectual property theft by the Chinese regime that has been affecting Americans. You're trying to figure out how much they're actually taking away from us. So we don't even know. What do you expect that number may be, and can you tell a bit more?
I'm not sure what the number would be, but I would suspect that it's billions and billions of dollars.
Per year or? Per
year. The founders, they knew if we can protect intellectual property and people can make money. Now, we won't give a monopoly indefinitely, but for a period of years, you'll be the only one that has the right to your design or your invention. And they knew, I mean, how extraordinary. They saw that back then. If you're going to have freedom, true freedom, you're going to have to protect people's intellectual property. And they did, and look what's resulted. I mean,
innovation.
Innovation, more here than anywhere.
And what would you say to Americans about them, to help them understand the importance of this bill and the implications of it?
It's trying to level the playing field. Okay, you're going to steal these intellectual property rights and profit from them, then we're going to get the money somewhere else and still make sure that that theft does not go on unaddressed. Because let's face it, I mean, it's a communist country, the government's in charge, and they've made clear they have the power to enforce whatever they cared to.
Well, Congressman, thank you for talking with us, and all the best for this bill.
Thank you so much.
December 10th is International Human Rights Day. It's also a day for us to remember that actions speak louder than words. Please be aware this report does include some descriptions of torture and images of abuse, but it does end with a message of hope. The UN's famous document, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, holds the Guinness World Record for being the most translated document in the world. Yet for the victims of severe human rights abuse, words aren't enough.
I was beaten until I was dizzy, vomiting, and my ears were ringing. At the time, I had been married for only 8 months, and I was pregnant.
In 2001, Li Huachi was arrested for printing human rights advocacy materials and flyers that exposed the CCP's abuse of millions of Chinese citizens who practice the peaceful Falun Gong spiritual movement. Then Chinese dictator Jiang Zemin vowed to crush the group in 1999. But millions of Chinese citizens refused and have been subjected to a massive nationwide persecution campaign that continues to this day.
During this persecution, I lost 4 of my family members within less than 100 days. My husband, my mother, father, and brother all passed away.
Li Hua's daughter, Xinyang Xu, only spent time with her father twice before he died, but only when he was left in tragic condition, emaciated from torture and abuse under the regime's deadly policies.
The first time I saw my dad was when I was 7 years old. He wanted to hug me, but he was so skinny I didn't let him hold me because I was afraid he would be too exhausted. It was very scary.
While Li Hua and her family's experience may seem like an extreme example, under the CCP, these abuses in China are widespread and are just the tip of the iceberg. In June this year, the UN's human rights experts issued an alarm about forced live organ harvesting in China.
At the beginning, people didn't believe these crimes could really be happening, but now that the facts have been proven, people are finally taking action.
This Human Rights Day, Li Hua is signing a new pledge and telling her story to encourage Americans to also take the pledge. On International Human Rights Day, Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts expressed concerns about China's human rights abuses, such as live organ harvesting against Falun Gong practitioners.
Do you think this issue has had enough attention?
No, and I think it's important, to shine a spotlight on everything. The United States has a responsibility, not just as the economic and military leader, but as the moral leader of the world, to shine a spotlight on human rights violations, no matter where they exist.
There's no question that the Falun Gong meets the definition of a religious community, at least under American law, and that that systematic attempts to wipe them out, to disperse them, to force them underground, is every bit the same kind of a genocide as going after people.
The U.S. Senate narrowly voted to block President Biden's COVID-19 vaccine mandate for the private sector. The Senate approved on Wednesday a resolution overturning the Biden administration's requirement that businesses with 100 or more workers have their employees be vaccinated or submit to weekly testing. Two Democrats, Senators Joe Manchin of West Virginia and John Tester of Montana, joined all 50 Republicans in voting to overturn the vaccine mandate. The Democratic-led House is unlikely to take it up, which means the mandate would stand, though the courts have put it on hold for now. The House passed a bill to address abuse of presidential power and protect against foreign interference in our elections. NTD's Melina Wisecup has the details for us. So, Melina, what can you tell us about this bill, and why does congressional leadership want to do this now?
As for the motivations behind this bill and the timing of it, as always, if you ask Republicans and Democrats, they'll give you very different answers. For Republicans, they say that this is just a further continuation of Democrats' attack on the former president. Now, of course, Democrats would argue that this is about securing the democracy and ensuring that future presidents don't grow too powerful. Now, Democrats would also say that the prior administration did show some gaps as far as Congress's ability to oversee the executive branch and whether or not it's abusing its power. So they want to use this bill as a way to fill what they call those gaps. Now, it's also important to keep in mind that right now the January 6th investigation is still ongoing, and the lead sponsor of this bill, Representative Adam Schiff, says that one of the most powerful parts of this bill is that it would enhance Congress's ability to enforce subpoenas. And we know those subpoenas are a crucial piece of those investigations into the actions on January 6th.
The strategy of all the Trump people, all the January 6th people, is to play out the clock. And that's why, and they might succeed in that. So that's why we have in this bill the provisions to expedite congressional subpoenas enforcement.
Now, this bill also does a couple of other things, including prohibiting self-pardons by the president, and it would require both the president and the vice president to release their tax returns, along with many other things that are included in this new bill. Now, I want to go back real quick to the timing. Like you mentioned earlier, the Senate moved this week to block Biden's vaccine mandate because Republicans in the Senate and two Democrats that joined those Republicans would say that this would be executive overreach, mandating vaccines for private businesses. But we asked Representative Schiff if he thinks that this would be an example of presidential overreach. Let's listen briefly to his response to my question just moments after the House passed that bill to limit presidential power.
No, look, I think the president was right to impose vaccine mandates to try to protect the health and welfare of the country.
Now, switching gears here for a second, Melina, Congress this week was working on a solution to raise the debt ceiling to avoid a default on the debt. The Senate got enough Republican votes to move this forward, but many Republicans in the Senate were upset with this temporary fix. What exactly is going on here?
Well, Steve, where we stand right now on that debt ceiling, both chambers of Congress have moved to pave a path for Senate Democrats to raise the debt ceiling on their own. But there are a couple of catches. So this is a temporary fix. It'll have to be taken up again in the future. It's also only a one-time fix. And the Democrats have to specify how much they want to raise the debt by. Now, although there was just enough Republican support to push this over the finish line in the Senate, the majority of Republicans are upset with Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell's deal with Schumer because specifically they say that it may erode the Senate rules which protect the minority party. We heard that from Senator Lindsey Graham, who expressed why he opposes this one-time temporary fix. But since enough Republicans did join in allowing this to happen, Democrats are expected to raise that debt in the coming days. Steve?
Thanks for that, Melina. And coming up, illegal immigration is still at record levels. Representative Tom Tiffany has just come back from the southern border, and he says those crossing illegally are coming from all over the world, and not just Mexico and South America, including many from the Middle East. The courts have ruled, and Trump's White House records need to be turned in to the January 6th committee. But Trump has 14 days to petition the Supreme Court. And an aide at the United States House of Representatives was arrested for allegedly attempting to carry a gun inside Congress. This on the same day President Biden was supposed to visit the Capitol. Former President Donald Trump has been trying to stop the House January 6th committee from getting his White House records, but this effort was rejected by a federal appeals court yesterday. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, in a 3-0 decision, rejected Trump's attempt, but it doesn't mean that the committee will immediately get the documents. Trump has 14 days to petition the Supreme Court to step in on his behalf. Trump's attorney, Justin Clark, said in November that they would try to take the case up to the Supreme Court if they lost. Deportations of illegal immigrants have dropped to new lows under President Biden's immigration policies. According to ICE records, deportations in the first 5 months of this year dropped to nearly 19,000. The data shows removals are on track to reach record lows. Biden administration officials claim that narrowing enforcement priorities are intended to let agents focus on what they call the worst offenders. Wisconsin Congressman Tom Tiffany has been to the southern border on multiple occasions and was just there in November with fresh eyes on the ongoing surge of illegal immigration on our southern border. Congressman Tom Tiffany, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Good to join you here.
Absolutely. Now, Congressman, the issue of immigration, illegal immigration on our southern border has kind of gotten swept under the rug with so much other things that have been going on. You've been down to the border as recent as just November. Can you tell us what's going on there? You've laid eyes down there. Is it still an issue? How big of an issue is it?
Yeah, between the debacle in Afghanistan, inflation, and other things, sometimes the border gets set aside. And I've been trying to make sure that it isn't, because it really is, I believe, the top issue here in the United States. So I've made multiple trips down to the border, including a couple trips to Texas this year, and of course went down to Panama earlier this year also. So I've really had a chance to see. I saw Arizona last year in 2020 when the border wall was working. When we heard from the Border Patrol that the Trump-era controls that were put in place on the border were working, interdictions were down significantly. And then you fast forward to the first trip I made this year in early April down to McAllen, Texas, and you could see it had all fallen apart.
And how big of a national security issue is this? Are we seeing people from the Middle East? I mean, people talk about unvetted Afghans coming in here. These are unvetted people. Where are they coming from?
Yeah. You're seeing people from all over, from Africa, the Middle East. We saw people coming from Eastern Europe also, and hearing stories about people from all over the world are coming through. And it is a huge national security concern. Meanwhile, when you look at the humanitarian situation down there, it's horrible. People are dying. We estimate about 10% that try to make the trip through the Darien Gap are dying during that trip. We heard anecdotal stories from people coming through the gap. They said, we're walking over bodies. We heard from the villagers at Bajo Chiquito. They would see babies washing down the river face down. So the humanitarian part of it is bad enough, but it's even worse with the national security risk. And that's the thing that I've really been emphasizing to my colleagues here in Congress, is that this is a huge opening for national security concerns with bad people that can come into the United States very easily at this point.
Now, Congressman, I want to switch gears for a second and talk to you about the issue of China. There's recently been the diplomatic boycott that the Biden administration has imposed on the Beijing Olympics. Do you think that that's enough? Do you support this effort?
Yeah, I think that was I think that was an important action that the Biden administration took. I do think that we should not participate in the Olympics in China. I mean, when you have a country that has an ethnic population like the Uyghurs who are in virtual concentration camps, when we hear the horror stories of how they're abusing people in Western China, we cannot allow that to stand without taking strong action against those efforts. And it's really important that we see some multinational corporations, I mean, take Nike, for example, which still is not standing up to China. They're putting their profits ahead of human rights. And we need to make sure that we're also pressuring those multinational corporations who have chosen to turn a blind eye to China. They also it needs to be made very clear to them they cannot do that, because China is very dependent. Also, while those companies do very well as a result of working with China, there's also a price to be paid for by China if these companies say, we will not accept your practices. So it takes us all working together, whether it's small or large corporations, whether it's countries around the world. We all need to say with one voice, China, you must respect human rights. You have not, you need to do that.
Congressman Tom Tiffany, thank you.
It's good to be here today.
An aide in the House of Representatives was arrested on Thursday for allegedly attempting to carry a gun inside Congress. Jeffrey Allsbrooks is a 57-year-old staffer with the House Chief Administrative Office. He had passed through the Longworth House office building security when a handgun was spotted on the security's X-ray screen. Allsbrooks was arrested and says that he forgot the gun was in his bag. The incident came on the same day President Joe Biden was scheduled to pay a visit to the Capitol. At least a dozen major U.S. cities have already set annual murder records in 2021, even with several weeks remaining in the year. Philadelphia, one of the largest cities in the United States, saw 525 murders in 2021. Earlier this month, Philadelphia Mayor Jim Kenney condemned the rising number of murders, saying it's terrible to every morning get up and have to go look at the numbers and then go look at the news and see the stories. Many cities throughout the nation also broke their previous homicide records, including Portland, Austin, and Columbus. Chicago still leads the United States with more than 730 murders so far this year. As families are getting ready to fly for the holidays, they may be hit with airline fees for baggage and schedule changes. These fees have increased tremendously over the past decade, and lawmakers on Capitol Hill are now pushing for more government regulation to keep the fees down.
That's right. Before 2008, checking a bag was free. Remember those days? Now, $35 for the first bag and $45 for the second bag.
How do they get away with it? They can because they have near monopolistic power over the routes that they run.
These members of Congress aim to pass the FAIR Act, short for Forbidding Airlines from Imposing Ridiculous Fees Act. It would prohibit airlines from charging what they call unreasonably high fees for basic services like bags and schedule changes. This bill would give the Department of Transportation the power to decide how high is too high. So the federal government would decide the maximum fees airlines would be able to charge. And that's all we have for you on the Capitol Report today. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next time.